On Thanksgiving morning, my daughter-in-law said, "Dinner's at my mom's, you stay home." I didn't argue. I just booked a trip. And when I posted the photos and she saw who was sitting beside me, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I know how far it travels. I stood in my kitchen staring at the turkey I'd bought 3 days earlier, still frozen solid in the refrigerator. 22 pounds of butterball that would never touch my oven. My hands shook as I held the phone, Kayla's words echoing in my head like a sentence being passed. "Dinner's at my mom's this year, Joelle. We won't have room for everyone. Won't have room." As if I were some distant relative instead of the grandmother of her 2 children, as if I hadn't raised the son she claimed to love so deeply, the same son cancer stole from us 18 months ago. I wandered into the living room and sank into David's old recliner, the one I still couldn't bring myself to give away, even though the leather was worn smooth on the armrests where his hands always rested. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. In 67 years, I had never spent Thanksgiving alone. Even in the lean years when money was tight and David worked double shifts at the factory, we always found a way to gather at our small kitchen table. My phone buzzed. A photo from Kala filled my screen. Her mother's dining room, beautifully set for what looked like 12 guests. The caption read, "Getting ready for our family feast, so grateful for everyone who could make it." Everyone who could make it. The passive-aggressive sting hit hard. I started scrolling through her social media, something I rarely used to do, but found myself doing more often since David died. There were pictures from last weekend's soccer game where my grandson Tommy scored his first goal of the season. I'd asked Kayla 3 times for the game schedule. She always answered with, "I'll let you know," which never turned into an invitation. There were photos from Emma's school play 2 weeks ago where she was a dancing sunflower. I only learned about it because I bumped into Kayla's neighbor at the grocery store. The pattern had been forming for months, and I had been too hopeful, too trusting, too desperate to stay connected, to see it clearly. But that perfectly set Thanksgiving table finally told the truth. Kayla didn't want me around. I thought back to the weeks after David's funeral, when she seemed genuinely grateful for my help with the kids while she struggled with her grief. She called me almost daily back then, asking me to pick up Emma from school to stay with Tommy during his nap. I felt touched that she leaned on me, that she saw me as someone she could rely on during the darkest time in both our lives. But slowly, the calls stopped. The invitations faded. The easy drop-ins turned into carefully scheduled visits that somehow always got postponed. 2 months ago, I finally asked her directly if everything was okay between us, if I had done something wrong. She looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes and insisted I was imagining it. "You're family, Joelle. You'll always be family. I'm just overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. Yet she somehow still found time for yoga classes, her book club, girls' nights out, all documented in cheerful Facebook posts. The worst part wasn't being excluded, it was being made to feel unreasonable for wanting to be included, like I was some clingy old woman who didn't know when she wasn't wanted. When I asked to take the kids to the zoo, she sighed and said, "I really need to keep their routine stable right now." When I offered to help plan Tommy's birthday party, she gave me that tight smile and replied, "I've got it handled, but thanks." That polite dismissal sliced deeper every time. My daughter Linda called from Oregon earlier in the week, asking about my Thanksgiving plans. When I told her I'd be with Kala and the kids, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Mom, are you sure? You know you can always fly here." Linda had never liked Kayla, even before David died. She always said something about her felt calculated, more like performing affection than giving it. I used to defend Kayla, thinking Linda was simply being protective of her brother. Now I wondered if she had seen something I'd chosen to overlook. I looked around my living room at the photos lining every shelf. David and me on our wedding day. David holding newborn Tommy, pride glowing on his face. Emma taking her first wobbly steps in this very room. The children were my last living link to my son. The proof that his love hadn't vanished with him, But what happens when that link is deliberately cut? What happens when the gatekeeper decides you don't belong anymore? The turkey in my fridge suddenly felt like a monument to my foolishness. I'd bought Emma's favorite cranberry sauce, Tommy's preferred stuffing mix, everything ready for a family celebration that didn't actually exist, and in that moment, something in me snapped into place. I grabbed my purse from the hallway table, feeling clearer than I had in months. If Kayla wanted to exclude me from her version of family, so be it. But I wasn't going to sit in an empty house, shrinking myself into someone grateful for scraps of affection. I had 24 hours until Thanksgiving. 24 hours to decide who I truly was. A discarded grandmother waiting for crumbs. Or the woman who had raised 3 children, buried a husband, and survived more heartbreak than Kala could imagine. My phone rang just as I reached for my car keys. Kayla's name appeared on the screen, and for one brief, foolish moment, my heart lifted. Maybe she'd reconsidered. Maybe she'd realized how hurtful her exclusion was. Hello? Hi, Joelle. I just wanted to make sure you were okay with tomorrow's arrangement. I know it's different from what you're used to. Different from what I'm used to, like spending Thanksgiving with my own family was an outdated habit I needed to outgrow. I'm perfectly fine, Kala. Great. I thought maybe you could use the quiet time anyway. I know the holidays have been hard since David. Her voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air, that I was too fragile, too grief-stricken to be pleasant company, that my sadness might somehow spoil their perfect gathering. You're right, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I think I'll use the time differently this year. There was a pause. I could almost hear her trying to parse my tone, waiting for a hint of passive aggression. Wonderful. I'll call you Friday and maybe we can plan something for the weekend. Another maybe. Another entry in her growing collection of empty reassurances. After hanging up, I sat in my car for several minutes, feeling something unfamiliar. Not anger, not sorrow, but something sharper and strangely invigorating. For the first time since David's death, I felt like I actually had a choice. And I was about to make one that would surprise everyone, including myself. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found a number I hadn't dialed in more than 2 years. My finger hovered over the screen before I finally pressed it. The phone rang 3 times. Hello? The voice was warm, familiar, textured by years. Marcus, it's Joelle. Joelle. Even after all this time, his voice carried the gentle surprise I remembered from decades ago, deeper now, rougher around the edges. My God, it really is you. I closed my eyes, suddenly transported back to a younger version of myself, a 22-year-old girl who believed she had all the time in the world to make the right choices. Hello, Marcus. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Never a bad time for you. The words slipped out of him as if 45 years hadn't passed between us. How are you? I heard about David. I'm so sorry. Of course he'd heard. In a place as small as Cedar Rapids, news traveled fast, especially when it involved people who had once been as inseparable, as whispered about as we were. Marcus and I had been the couple everyone assumed would marry after college, high school sweethearts destined for the fairy tale ending. Until life complicated everything in ways we couldn't navigate at 22. Thank you, I said quietly. It's been difficult. I hesitated, suddenly unsure what exactly I was doing. What did I think this conversation would accomplish? Marcus, this may sound strange, but what are you doing tomorrow? A brief silence, him processing, trying to understand what was really beneath the question. Well, tomorrow is Thanksgiving, he said softly. Yes, it is. Since Margaret passed last year, I've been spending it alone. My daughter and her family are in California, and I haven't felt much like celebrating. He cleared his throat. Why do you ask? Margaret. I'd heard about her passing through mutual friends. I never met her, but everyone spoke well of her. A kind woman, a devoted teacher, a steady partner. They were married 38 years. A good marriage by all accounts. The kind I'd hoped he would find after everything that happened between us. I find myself in a similar situation, I said gently. My daughter-in-law made other plans. I'm looking at spending the day alone. That doesn't sound like the Joelle I remember. You always had people around you, family, friends, someone you were taking care of. He was right. For decades, I had been the organizer, the host, the glue holding everyone together, but Kayla had made it very clear that my role wasn't needed anymore. Things change, I said. They do, he murmured. Another pause, then his voice shifted, turning warmer, more tentative. Joelle, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? Nothing fancy, just two old friends who don't want to spend Thanksgiving alone. The question should have startled me. Instead, it felt strangely natural. I'd like that very much. Do you still like to travel? He asked lightly. I was thinking we could drive up to that little inn in Galena we always talked about visiting. They serve a traditional Thanksgiving dinner. We could catch up. The inn in Galena. We'd planned to go there for our honeymoon back when we thought we'd get married, before everything fell apart in ways that seemed impossible to overcome at 22, but looked very different through the eyes of a 67-year-old widow. That sounds perfect, I heard myself say. What time should I be ready? How about I pick you up at 10? It's a 2-hour drive, and dinner is at 2. After we hung up, I sat in my car feeling like I'd stepped straight off a cliff and discovered I could fly. The spontaneity, the impulsiveness, it felt like a part of myself I hadn't felt in years. Ever since losing David, every decision had been weighed down by grief, obligation, and the expectations of others. But this was for me. I drove to the mall, somewhere I rarely went since switching to online shopping, but I needed something to wear tomorrow. Something that wasn't widow black or grandmother sensible. The saleswoman at Nordstrom was probably my daughter's age, stylish, warm, and not at all condescending when I explained I needed something suitable for dinner at a nice inn. Celebrating something special? She asked, pulling dresses from the rack. In a way, yes. I brushed my fingers over a burgundy wrap dress, elegant, understated. I'm having dinner with an old friend. How lovely, she said with a smile. Old friends know all your stories. If only it were that simple. Still, the dress fit perfectly. In the fitting room mirror, I saw something I hadn't recognized in months. I looked like myself again, not the grieving widow, not the grandmother politely pushed to the sidelines, but Joelle, a woman with her own life, her own desires, her own choices. I bought the dress, along with a new pair of shoes and a small overnight bag that startled me with its implications. Was I planning to stay the night? Marcus had mentioned the inn had rooms available. Separate rooms, of course, but still. The thought made my pulse flutter, a mix of fear and exhilaration that reminded me I was still very much alive. At home, I moved with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I booked a hair appointment for the next morning, something I never would have done on such short notice, but the receptionist managed to squeeze me in when I told her it was for a special occasion. I laid the new dress on my bed beside the pearl necklace David had given me for our 20th anniversary. He always said it brought out the color of my eyes. Looking at it now, I realized he was right. When had I stopped choosing things that made me feel beautiful? My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. How's your Thanksgiving prep going, Mom? Are you making your famous sweet potato casserole for Kayla's family? I stared at the message before answering. Change of plans. I'm having dinner with an old friend instead. Her reply came instantly. Really? Who? That's wonderful. I hesitated, then typed, Marcus Wellington. Do you remember me mentioning him? The phone rang before I set it down. Mom, Marcus Wellington? You're Marcus Wellington? Linda's voice was sharp with surprise and something else, something protective maybe. We're just having dinner, I said, two old friends catching up. Mom, he's not just an old friend. Didn't you once tell me he was the one who got away? That if things had been different? She trailed off, but I knew exactly what she meant. A conversation from years ago, probably after a couple glasses of wine, about the path not taken. The choices that felt impossible at 22, but led to entirely different lives. That was a very long time ago, I said. But still. Linda hesitated. Mom, are you sure you're ready for this? Dad's only been gone 18 months. Only 18 months. As if grief came with a timeline others were allowed to enforce. As if I needed permission to sit across a table from someone who wasn't my late husband. I'm having Thanksgiving dinner, Linda. I'm not eloping to Vegas. She let out a shaky laugh. I know, I'm sorry. I just worry about you, especially with how Kayla's been acting. This has nothing to do with Kala, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. If Kala had welcomed me into her home, if she'd made room for me in my grandchildren's lives, would I have called Marcus? Or would I have stayed the same grateful, undemanding grandmother, accepting whatever crumbs of affection she chose to toss my way? I love you, Mom. Have a wonderful time. After we hung up, I walked through my house with new eyes. The photos of David and me, the memories of 43 years of marriage, the life we'd built, it all felt steady, unthreatened. If anything, I felt certain David would have approved. He had never been jealous, and he'd always encouraged me to keep old friendships, even the complicated ones. I picked up a picture of him from our last anniversary. He was smiling at something I'd said, his eyes warm with love. A good man, a man who had loved me completely. What do you think, sweetheart? I whispered to the photo. Am I doing the right thing? The silence felt peaceful rather than empty. For the first time since he died, I wasn't asking for permission to live. I was simply living. I was packing my overnight bag when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Kayla standing on the porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I opened the door, and her gaze immediately fell to the overnight bag in my hand. Going somewhere? She asked, tone light but eyes sharp. Actually, yes, I have plans for tomorrow. Her eyebrows shot up. Plans? What kind of plans? For a moment I considered telling her the truth, but something in her expression, a kind of possessive concern, as if she believed she had the authority to approve my plans, stopped me. I'm having dinner with a friend. Oh. She looked genuinely thrown by that. Apparently the idea that I might have a life outside her orbit had never crossed her mind. Well, that's nice. I just brought you some leftovers from our prep tonight. Mom made too much stuffing. She handed me a small container, kind enough on the surface, but still a reminder that I was being offered extras, scraps, the things no one else wanted. That's thoughtful. Thank you. So, this friend, she continued, refusing to take the hint. Anyone I know? I met her gaze, steady and calm. No, I don't think you do. Something flickered in her expression, alarm, maybe irritation, as if my independence was inconvenient for her. Well, I hope you have a nice time, she said stiffly. After she left, I realized I was smiling. For the first time in months, I had a secret, something that belonged entirely to me, something Kala couldn't organize, monitor, or dismiss. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be the excluded grandmother sitting alone. I would be a woman having dinner with someone who once knew her better than anyone. The only question left was this: who would I discover I had become in the years between then and now? The drive to Galena unfolded in easy conversation, broken by stretches of quiet that felt surprisingly comfortable. Marcus looked distinguished behind the wheel of his silver Lexus, his hair now completely white but still thick, his profile marked by the same strong jawline I'd memorized in college. He had aged well, the way some men do when their lives have been steady rather than ground down by constant disappointment. We talked about safe topics at first: the changing scenery along Highway 20, his retirement from the insurance business 3 years earlier, my volunteer work at the library before David's illness forced me to step back. But beneath the polite catching up lay the unspoken weight of our shared history, a bridge neither of us was quite ready to cross. The inn in Galena sat perched on a bluff over the Mississippi River, its Victorian architecture and wraparound porches exactly as I'd pictured them decades ago. Marcus had reserved a table by the window. When he ordered a bottle of Pinot Noir without asking, remembering somehow that it was still my favorite, I felt a strange sense of completion, like a circle finally closing. "You look beautiful, Joelle," he said simply, raising his glass. I should have said it earlier, but I was nervous. Nervous? I laughed, touched by the honesty. Aren't we both too old for nerves? He smiled, and for a moment I saw the young man who once made my heart race. I haven't been on a dinner date in over 2 years, he admitted. I'm not sure the rules are the same at our age. A dinner date? The phrase sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. I'm not sure there are rules at our age, I said softly. We ordered the traditional Thanksgiving meal, turkey and all the trimmings. Comfort food for a day that carried more emotional weight than either of us was acknowledging. While we waited, Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of his daughter and grandchildren in California. Sarah's youngest just turned 16, he said, swiping to a photo of a girl with strikingly familiar features. She wants to be a veterinarian, very determined, just like her grandmother was. Margaret was determined, I agreed. Actually, he said, lowering the phone, I meant like you. He looked directly at me. Sarah has your eyes, Joelle. Your determination. Even the way she tilts her head when she's thinking. The words hit me like a blow. I stared at the photo, then at Marcus, trying to process what he was telling me without stating it outright. Marcus, I whispered. I know I should have told you differently, he said gently. Should have prepared you. But I wasn't sure how to bring it up after all this time. My mind raced backward, 46 years, to when Marcus and I broke up, to the panic of discovering I was pregnant, to David stepping in, offering marriage and stability without ever questioning the timing or paternity. David knew, I whispered, my throat tightening. I don't think so, Marcus said. Not for certain. But he loved you, Joelle. And he loved Michael as his own son. That was enough for him. Michael, my firstborn, the son I lost to cancer just 18 months ago. David and Michael had always been alike, steady, funny in the same understated way, practical to their core. I had never let myself compare them to Marcus, never allowed myself to look too closely for similarities that could unravel the life we'd built. How long have you known? I asked. Marcus stared out over the river for a long moment. I suspected when Michael was born, he said quietly. He was premature, but not as premature as the dates suggested. But you were newly married, you seemed happy, and I was young and scared. My family had their own opinions about who I should marry, so I let it go. The waitress arrived with our plates, her cheerful chatter feeling surreal against the magnitude of our conversation. When did you know for sure? I asked after she left. 10 years ago, he said. When Michael needed surgery, you remember? Complications from that old football injury. I nodded. Compatible either. The doctors mentioned compatible either. The doctors mentioned that sometimes blood types don't line up the way you expect, and that they might need to run a broader genetic panel. I remembered David's frustration, his helplessness at not being able to do more. Michael called me, Marcus said quietly. He wanted to cover all the bases, family medical history, hereditary issues. He asked if I'd get tested just to rule things out. My heart hammered. And the results? I asked. A perfect match, Marcus said. Not just compatible. Perfect. The kind of match you only get between a parent and child. My fork slid from my fingers. Did you tell him? I asked, barely breathing. No, Marcus said gently. But I think he figured it out. He was a smart man. He started asking questions about our college years, about why we broke up. What did you say? I told him the past was complicated, but that David was his father in every way that counted. I closed my eyes. My son had known, or at least suspected, and he had reached out to his biological father without telling me. It should have hurt. Instead, it fit perfectly, like a puzzle piece I'd always known was missing. He never said anything to you? Marcus asked, not directly. Marcus nodded slowly. But in the months before he got sick, he talked about family more, about making sure people knew they were loved before it was too late. I had assumed Michael's sudden interest in family history had been ordinary sentimentality, brought on by David's age. Maybe it was. Or maybe he had been trying to tell me something without betraying the man who'd raised him. I stared out at the river, watching a barge crawl downstream, and tried to reconcile this new version of my life with everything I had believed for 46 years. David, who had married me knowing I was pregnant with another man's child, yet never once made me feel indebted or ashamed. Marcus, who had stepped aside so I could build a stable life, even though it meant losing his son. And Michael, my son, who had pieced together the truth and somehow managed to honor both his fathers without wounding either one. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked quietly. Marcus didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with grief. "Because when I heard that Michael died, I realized I'd lost my son twice. Once when I walked away 46 years ago, and again when cancer took him before I could figure out how to be in his life properly." He swallowed hard and continued, "I'm not asking you to choose me over David's memory. I'm not asking you to rewrite your past or pretend your marriage wasn't real and good. But after all this time, I'm asking whether we might find a way to be in each other's lives again." I thought about Kayla's subtle dismissals, the slow erosion of my place in my grandchildren's world, the loneliness that had crept into my holidays and my everyday life. Then I thought about the ease I'd felt in the car with Marcus, the feeling of being known, seen, valued by someone who remembered who I was before I spent decades defining myself by my roles. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Neither do I," he said softly, "but maybe we could figure it out together." The waitress returned with coffee and pumpkin pie, and the heaviness lifted. We drifted into lighter conversation. His travels since retirement, the book he was writing about the insurance industry, the hobbies he wanted to pick up. I heard myself talking about dreams I'd shelved for years, learning photography, taking art classes. It felt like waking up, like pieces of myself long buried under responsibility were rising to the surface again. So when Marcus suggested staying overnight, separate rooms, he clarified, I said yes without hesitation. We walked through Galena's historic downtown at sunset, browsing the shop windows, talking about everything and nothing. At an antique store, he bought me a small silver bracelet I'd admired, something delicate, feminine. "For a new beginning," he said as he fastened it around my wrist. Standing outside the inn as night settled around us, I felt like a completely different person from the woman who'd been excluded from Thanksgiving dinner just that morning. Marcus watched me with an expression I hadn't seen in decades, not polite nostalgia, but something deeper. "Joelle," he said softly, touching my cheek, "I know this is sudden, but there's something you should know." "What?" "I never stopped loving you. Not completely. A part of me has been waiting 46 years for a second chance." Before I could speak, before I could think about the implications, the complications, my phone buzzed. Kayla's name flashed on the screen, again and again. I looked at Marcus, at the hopeful softness in his eyes, at the bracelet glinting on my wrist, then at my phone, vibrating insistently. For the first time in my life, I sent her call to voicemail. "What were you saying?" I asked, stepping closer. He smiled and took my hand. But even as possibility blossomed between us, I saw Kayla's name light up my phone again. She wasn't giving up, and something in my gut told me that when she finally reached me, everything was about to get far more complicated than a simple Thanksgiving dinner with an old flame. I didn't check my messages until the next morning. Marcus and I had spent the evening walking along the river and talking in the inn's lobby until nearly midnight, sharing memories that felt both nostalgic and strangely current. When I finally returned to my room, I turned my phone completely off. Morning brought 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in my robe, scrolling through Kala's increasingly frantic messages. The early ones were polite, even friendly. "Just checking in. Hope you're having a nice time with your friend." But as the night went on, the tone changed. 7:15 p.m. "Joelle, please call me back. I'm getting worried." 8:30 p.m. "Your neighbor said she saw you leave with a man. is everything okay? 9:45 p.m.? I found some photos on Facebook. We need to talk. My heart stopped. Photos on Facebook. I grabbed my laptop and logged in. It didn't take long to find what she meant. The inn had posted pictures from their Thanksgiving dinner, happy couples at their tables, and there we were in the background, Marcus leaning toward me, smiling, his hand resting gently over mine. We looked comfortable, natural, intimate. I checked Marcus's profile, something I hadn't done in years. His newest post was a photo of the sunset over the Mississippi with the caption, "Perfect ending to a perfect day with someone special." His friends were already asking who the someone special was, but what made my blood run cold wasn't the photo. It was his profile information, founder and former CEO of Wellington Insurance Group, the same company that handled Michael's life insurance policy, the same company Kayla was constantly dealing with as the beneficiary. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "Joelle." Kayla's voice was tight, controlled, like she was holding back anger by sheer force of will. "Where are you?" "I'm in Galena," I said calmly, "having breakfast." "With Marcus Wellington." It wasn't a question. I could hear the accusation beneath it. "Yes," I said. "With Marcus." Her breath hissed through the line. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The question blindsided me. "What I've done," I repeated. "I had dinner with an old friend." "An old friend?" Kayla's voice shot up sharply. "Joelle, Marcus Wellington is the CEO of the company that holds Michael's life insurance policy. The policy I've been dealing with for the past year and a half. The policy that's been paying Tommy's private school tuition, Emma's dance lessons, keeping us afloat while I figure out how to rebuild our lives." I felt the blood drain from my face. In all our long conversations the day before, Marcus had never once mentioned his connection to Michael's policy. He'd never hinted that he knew anything about Kayla's dealings with the company, or that the Wellington Insurance Group was him. "I don't understand what you're suggesting," I said slowly. "I'm suggesting," she said, each word clipped with fury, "that it looks like you're sleeping with the man who controls my children's financial future. Do you understand how that appears? Do you understand what kind of position that puts me in?" "Kayla, I'm not sleeping with anyone. And even if I were, that's not your business." "It becomes my business when it affects my children's security." Her composure cracked completely. "Do you think this is some kind of game? You think you can run off with random men and not consider the consequences for the rest of us?" "Random men?" The dismissiveness, the contempt, it ignited something fierce and long suppressed inside me. "Marcus is not a random man," I said, my voice low and steady. "We have a history." "How long?" she demanded. The question hung heavy between us, accusatory, probing. "Kayla, it's complicated." "Not for me. I need you to explain it." Across the breakfast room, Marcus sat reading the newspaper, sipping coffee, occasionally glancing up to smile at me, peaceful, unaware that our reunion was detonating a small bomb 2 hours away. "We dated in college," I said carefully, "before I married David." "And," she pressed, "and what? People don't just reconnect with college boyfriends and run off to romantic inns unless there's something else going on." Her intuition was sharper than I'd ever given her credit for, but I was not about to reveal Michael's paternity while she was in this state. "Sometimes people reconnect," I said, "especially after losing their spouses." "Oh." Her tone turned icy. "So this is a midlife crisis. You're lonely. David's gone. So now you're acting out." The cruelty of it, reducing my reconnection with Marcus to a psychological episode, hit harder than I expected. "David has been gone for 18 months, I said quietly. "I'm allowed to have relationships." "Not with the man who controls our insurance money." "Your insurance money?" I repeated, the words landing cold. "Since when is Michael's life insurance ours?" The silence on the line was long, too long. When Kayla spoke again, her voice had changed. Beneath the panic was something harder, calculated. "Since I became a single mother with 2 kids and no career," she said. Since I spent 15 years supporting Michael instead of building my own path. Since I became the only one keeping our family together after your son died. Your son. Not her husband, not the father of her children. Your son. As if Michael's death had been mine alone to carry. Kayla, I said carefully, are you suggesting I can't have a personal life because it might interfere with the insurance payments you receive? I'm suggesting, she snapped, that you are being selfish and short-sighted. That you're risking our entire future over some romantic fantasy with a man who could destroy us with one phone call. The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. Marcus doesn't handle individual claims, I said. He hasn't worked on day-to-day operations for years, and even if he did, insurance companies don't revoke legitimate policies because an executive has a personal relationship. You don't know that. Actually, I said, anger rising, I do. Because unlike you, I don't assume everything is about manipulation and personal leverage. The jab landed, hard. Kayla exploded. Everything is about money, Joelle, and if you don't understand that, then you're more naive than I thought. Is that really what you think of me? I think, she hissed, that you're a lonely old woman so desperate for male attention that you'd jeopardize my children's future for one night with a man who used to matter to you. The words hit their mark. They were meant to, but they also illuminated something I had avoided admitting to myself for months. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about insurance. This was about control, about keeping me dependent, grateful, and isolated. I'm hanging up now, I said quietly. Joelle, don't you I ended the call and turned off my phone. Marcus glanced up from his newspaper as I returned to the table, concern etched across his face. Everything okay? He asked. I sat down, my hands trembling, and reached for my coffee. Well, I said, taking a steadying breath, according to my daughter-in-law, you're apparently holding my family hostage with your vast insurance empire. He set down the paper, his expression shifting from concern to seriousness. She knows who I am. She figured it out from the photos, I said. Marcus, why didn't you tell me you handled Michael's policy? His face softened. Because I don't handle it, he said. I haven't for over 2 years. He reached across the table and took my hand gently. Joelle, I need you to understand something. Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest. I stepped away from anything involving your family's accounts the day I learned Michael was my biological son. It would have been a conflict of interest. It wouldn't have been fair to any of you. He hesitated. But Kayla doesn't know that. I let out a humorless laugh. Kayla doesn't know a lot of things, apparently. His voice sharpened slightly, an edge I hadn't heard from him before. She doesn't know, for example, that she's been lying to you about the insurance payments. I stared at him. What do you mean? Marcus was silent for a long moment, weighing his words. The policy Michael left behind was substantial, Joelle. $750,000. I felt the world tilt. $750,000. Far more than anything I had imagined. Michael had always been responsible, but this level of planning was beyond anything I knew about. How was it structured? I asked. 50% to Kayla as the primary beneficiary, he said. 25% to each child, held in trust until they turned 25. He paused, and there was a provision for you as well. For me? $25,000 to be paid out immediately upon his death. Air left my lungs. I never received $25,000. I know, Marcus said gently. Because Kayla never submitted the paperwork. As far as the company is concerned, you either decline the payout or don't know it exists. The betrayal was so calculated, so cold-blooded, that I couldn't process it all at once. She told me Michael barely left anything, I whispered. That she's been struggling, that money is tight, that life is hard. Marcus shook his head. She received $375,000 18 months ago. The children's portions, another $375,000, are in trust earning interest. Kayla has no access to those funds, but the money she does have? He looked at me pointedly. She could live comfortably for years if she made reasonable decisions. I thought about every conversation where she'd talked about struggling, every sigh, every guilt-laden comment about how expensive everything was, every subtle implication that I wasn't helping enough as a grandmother. She's been manipulating me. It appears that way, Marcus said, his voice low. But why? I demanded. If she doesn't need money, why push me away? Why keep me out of the kids' lives? He squeezed my hand. I think you already know. And I did. Kayla didn't want me around because grandmothers ask questions, because grandmothers notice things, because children mention things, because I was a witness to Michael's life, and she wanted to control the narrative of his death. She didn't want the one person who might see through her careful performance of overwhelmed single motherhood. My phone, still turned off, sat on the table like a live grenade. I knew that once I turned it back on, the explosion would begin again. But for the first time in months, I didn't care. Marcus, I said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Anything. Yesterday, when you suggested dinner, when you told me about Michael, was any of it motivated by what you know about Kayla? By how she's treated me? He considered the question seriously. Partly, he admitted. I've watched from a distance. I've seen how isolated you've become. Then he held my gaze. But mostly it was because I've missed you every single day for 46 years, and I finally had a reason to call you. I believed him. His honesty felt like oxygen after months of suffocating under doubt and manipulation. What happens now? I asked. Now, he said. We finish our coffee, then we drive back to reality and deal with whatever storm is waiting. We'll figure out the rest afterward. He was right about the storm. When I turned my phone back on, it nearly vibrated off the table. 37 new messages, 14 missed calls. Not only from Kayla, but from Linda, neighbors, numbers I didn't recognize. The photo from the inn's Facebook page had been shared dozens of times. The story of the grieving grandmother running off with an old lover was spreading through Cedar Rapids like wildfire. But as I scrolled through the frantic messages, I realized something shocking. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let Kayla twist the story however she wanted. Let the neighbors whisper about propriety and timing. For the first time in 18 months, I was exactly where I wanted to be, with someone who valued me for who I am, not what I provide. And if that threatened Kayla's carefully curated power structure, then maybe it was time for the structure to fall. The drive back to Cedar Rapids felt like heading toward a battlefield. Marcus and I agreed he'd drop me at home so I could confront whatever awaited me alone. We'd talk later, once the immediate crisis settled, but when we pulled into my driveway, I saw Kayla's black SUV parked so close to my front door it looked staged, territorial, confrontational. Are you sure you don't want me to stay? Marcus asked, watching the SUV with concern. I need to handle this myself, I said, though my stomach churned. But thank you, for everything. He squeezed my hand. Call me later, he said softly. No matter how late, no matter what happens. Kayla sat on my front porch steps with her arms wrapped around her knees, an attempt at vulnerability that would have fooled anyone who didn't know her as well as I did. She stood the moment I approached, her expression a tense mixture of fury and genuine panic. We need to talk, she said flatly. I assumed that's why you're here, I replied. I unlocked the door and walked inside. She followed without waiting to be invited, as if my home were simply an extension of hers. Would you like some coffee? I asked, more out of habit than courtesy. I don't want coffee, Joelle. She closed the door with more force than necessary. I want to understand what the hell you think you're doing. I set my overnight bag down and turned to face her. In my own home, surrounded by memories, stability, and pieces of myself she could never take, I felt steadier. I'm living my life, I said, something I should have started doing months ago. Living your life? Kayla's voice cracked with incredulity. Is that what you call running off with Michael's insurance agent behind my back? Marcus is not Michael's insurance agent, I said calmly. And I didn't go behind anyone's back. I don't need your permission to have dinner with a friend. A friend? She thrust her phone toward me. The photo from the inn, zoomed in on Marcus and me at our table, filled the screen. This doesn't look like dinner with a friend. It looks like you're having an affair with a man who could destroy our financial security whenever he feels like it. Affair. There it was. The word she wanted. Loaded, accusatory, designed to shame. In Kayla's world, I was supposed to remain the grieving widow, docile, sexless, endlessly available to help with her children, but never entitled to a life of my own. First of all, I said evenly, Marcus has no involvement in your insurance matters. And second, even if he did, that doesn't give you the right to control my personal relationships. It gives me the right to protect my children. From what? Their grandmother having a life? Kayla began pacing, her agitation mounting with each step. From the scandal, Joelle, from the gossip. She threw her hands up. Do you know what people are saying? That you've lost your mind from grief, that you're making a fool of yourself, chasing after some old boyfriend like a teenager. The cruelty hit like a punch. Is that what you think? I asked quietly. That I'm making a fool of myself? I think you're not thinking clearly, she snapped. I think you're so desperate to feel young again that you're willing to jeopardize everything Michael worked for, everything he left for his children. What exactly do you think I'm jeopardizing? That stopped her. She stared at me as if trying to decide whether I was genuinely clueless or deliberately provoking her. The insurance money, she whispered finally. If Marcus decides he doesn't like how things are arranged, if he thinks I'm taking advantage of you, or if you two break up. The insurance money, I interrupted, is not subject to Marcus's personal feelings. That's not how insurance works. You don't know that for certain. Actually, I said, my voice turning steel, I do, because Marcus told me exactly how the policy was structured. Kayla's whole body went rigid. What do you mean? She whispered. I sat down on the sofa, exhaustion washing over me. I know about the $750,000, I said. I know about the kids' trust funds, and I know about the $25,000 that was supposed to come to me. The color drained from her face. She dropped into David's old recliner like her legs had given out. He told you, she breathed. He told me you never filed the paperwork, I said. He told me you've been sitting on nearly $400,000 while telling me you're barely scraping by. You don't understand, she said weakly. Then explain it to me. Kayla stared at the carpet for so long I wondered if she was deciding which version of the truth she could spin fastest. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet. But behind the tears was calculation. I was protecting you, she said softly. From what? $25,000? From feeling obligated, she insisted. From feeling like you had to help us. I knew that if you had that money, you'd spend it on the kids. I wanted you to keep it for yourself, for traveling, or, I don't know, something that makes you happy. It was a beautiful story, selfless, thoughtful, and absolute nonsense. If that were true, I said, you could have told me about it and asked me not to spend it. You didn't have to hide it entirely. I was going to tell you eventually, she muttered, when the time was right. And when would that have been? After you pushed me out of the children's lives? After I stopped asking questions about why a widow with nearly $400,000 couldn't afford dance lessons? Her expression changed, raw, desperate, unmasked. You have no idea what it's been like, she said, her voice sharpening. Being a single mother, being judged for every decision, having everyone assume they know better than I do about what my children need. I never judged you, I said. You judged me constantly. She shot up from the chair like she'd been burned. Every time you offered help, every time you made a suggestion, every time you looked at me like I wasn't doing enough. The accusation stung because there was a sliver of truth. I had worried. I had suggested things. I had watched her struggle, but that was normal concern, not the condemnation she imagined. So you solved that by cutting me out? I asked. I created boundaries, she said defiantly. I needed space to figure out motherhood without being undermined. Boundaries, I repeated. Is that what you call excluding me from Thanksgiving, or not telling me about Tommy's soccer games, or Emma's play? They weren't deliberate. Stop lying to me, Kayla. The words came out sharper than I intended, but necessary. Just stop. We both know what you've been doing, and we both know why. She stared at me with something close to hatred. Fine, she spat. You want the truth? Here's the truth. She took a step toward me, trembling with anger. You're suffocating, Joelle. You hover, Kayla said, her voice rising. You worry, you make suggestions, and you want to be involved in every decision. Michael used to complain about it all the time. The lie was so deliberate, so vicious, so expertly crafted to wound, that for a fleeting second I almost admired her boldness. Michael never complained about me to you, I said quietly. Not once. She crossed her arms. How would you know? You weren't around for most of our marriage. You were too busy taking care of David to pay attention to what your son really needed. What my son needed, I said, my voice steady as steel, was a wife who loved him for who he was, not someone who saw him as a meal ticket. The accusation landed like a hammer between us. Kala's face went stark white, then flushed red. For a moment, I thought she might actually hit me. How dare you? She whispered. How dare I what? I asked. Tell the truth? She glared at me with pure hatred. Michael was worth $750,000. Dead, I continued. Kayla, how much was he worth to you alive? I loved him, she said through her teeth. You loved what he gave you. The house, the stability, the picture-perfect life. But you didn't love him enough to share him with his mother, did you? You didn't love him enough to make room for the woman who raised him. Kala shot to her feet, her composure shattering completely. You think you know everything, don't you? She spat. You think you're some perfect mother, the perfect grandmother. She leaned forward, eyes blazing. But you know what, Joelle? Michael felt sorry for you. He only stayed in touch with you out of obligation, not love. 18 months ago, those words would have broken me. But with Marcus's bracelet warm on my wrist and his kindness still echoing in my chest, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. Maybe he did feel obligated, I said calmly. But obligation can be a form of love too. I paused. And at least he felt obligated to me. What does that say about how he felt about you? The question hit its mark. Kayla's face crumpled, really crumpled, and for the first time since she barged into my house, she looked genuinely vulnerable rather than calculated. He was going to leave me, she whispered. I blinked, stunned. What? Before he got sick, she said, voice trembling. He was going to leave me. He said he'd fallen out of love. He said we'd grown apart. He wanted counseling, but he didn't think it would help. I sank into a chair, floored. I hadn't known, not even a hint. The last months of Michael's life had been dominated by hospital rooms, treatment schedules, and endless fear. Personal struggles had felt irrelevant in the face of cancer. He increased the life insurance policy 3 months before he was diagnosed, Kayla continued. Not because he thought he was dying. He wasn't even sick then. He did it because he was planning to divorce me. He wanted to make sure I was financially secure, so no one could say he abandoned his children. Suddenly, so many pieces slid into place. Michael calling Marcus more often, his questions about genetics, his sudden intensity about family connections and letting people know he loved them. He'd been preparing for a major life change. Then cancer came and rewrote every plan he had. So when he got sick, I said slowly, you had a choice. Be the devoted wife who stayed through his illness, or be the woman he was planning to leave. I chose to love him, Kayla cried. I chose to be there, to take care of him, to make sure his last months were full of comfort and stability, and I chose to make sure the children remembered him as a man who was loved, not someone who walked out on their family. And you chose, I said softly, To erase me. Because I might have noticed the truth. Her silence was answer enough. Yes, she whispered. You would have asked questions. You would have noticed things. You would have made everything complicated. For the first time since the conversation began, I felt something like sympathy. She had been trapped, holding together a marriage that was breaking while navigating the horrors of cancer and protecting 2 children from emotional chaos. But sympathy was not the same as acceptance, and it didn't excuse her manipulations. I understand why you did what you did, I said. But Michael has been gone for 18 months. Kala, when were you planning to stop punishing me for existing? I wasn't punishing you? Yes, I said quietly. You were. Because every time you looked at me, you saw evidence that Michael might have chosen differently if he'd lived. You saw the support he had outside your marriage. You saw the possibility that he would have left. Kayla wiped her eyes, mascara streaking down her cheeks. So, what happens now? She asked, small and defeated. Now, I said, sitting up straighter, you file the paperwork so I receive my rightful portion of Michael's policy. She blinked, stunned. Now you stop lying to the children about why their grandmother isn't around. Her lip trembled. And now you figure out how to co-parent with me. Not compete with me, not replace me, co-parent. And if I don't? She whispered. I thought about Marcus waiting for my call, about the $25,000 that belonged to me, about Tommy and Emma growing up without knowing their father's mother. Then I shook my head. Then I stopped making things easy for you, I said. I stopped playing along with your version of our family, and I stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices. Kayla stared at me for a long time, weighing her options like a woman trapped in a maze of her own making. Finally, she picked up her purse. I'll think about what you said. Don't think too long, I called after her. I'm done waiting for you to decide whether I matter. The door clicked shut behind her, and in the quiet that followed, I realized something fundamental had shifted inside me. For months, I'd tried to earn my way back into Kayla's good graces, accepting crumbs of contact with Tommy and Emma, convincing myself that a sliver of family was better than none. But now I wasn't begging for space in their lives anymore. I had taken it back, but I wasn't that desperate anymore. I had choices now, real choices. People who valued me, resources I had forgotten I possessed, strength I hadn't realized I'd been rebuilding piece by piece. When I called Marcus that evening, my voice was steady. How did it go? He asked. It went exactly as badly as expected, I said, but for the first time in months, I don't care. Good, he said gently. That means you're ready for whatever comes next. What does come next? Whatever we want to come next. The freedom in that simple sentence made me smile for the first time that day. Tomorrow, I would begin the paperwork to claim my inheritance. I would call a lawyer and learn my rights as a grandmother. I would start building a life that didn't revolve around earning the approval of someone who never wanted me there to begin with. Tonight, I was going to imagine a future with someone who did want me. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Marcus's house in Galena, our house, watching the Mississippi River turn gold beneath the sunrise. We had sold both our properties and bought this restored Victorian together. It was big enough for his daughter's family to visit, close enough to Cedar Rapids for me to remain a constant presence in Tommy and Emma's lives whenever Kayla allowed it. The transition hadn't been easy. There were lawyers, tents, family meetings, and weeks when I questioned whether the emotional cost was worth it. But that morning, sipping coffee while the world softened into daylight, I knew I'd made the right choice. My phone buzzed, a text from Linda. How's retirement treating you, Mom? Scott and I are still planning to visit next month. I smiled as I typed, retirement is wonderful. Marcus is teaching me to fish, and I'm teaching him to make your grandmother's apple pie. Can't wait to see you both. Navigating the new family dynamics had been interesting. Linda had been cautiously supportive from the beginning, mainly because she saw how happy I was. Michael's children had been a more complicated matter. Tommy, now 9, had adjusted quickly to having another grandfather figure. Emma, at 11, had struggled more, still sorting out her loyalty to her father's memory. But slowly, steadily, progress was happening. Just last weekend, Marcus attended Emma's piano recital. She'd actually smiled when he complimented her afterward. Small steps, but meaningful ones. "Good morning, beautiful." I looked up to see Marcus standing in the doorway, already dressed for our morning walk along the river trail. At 71, he looked better than most men in their 50s, fit, bright-eyed, buoyed by a lifetime of optimism. "Good morning yourself," I said, kissing his cheek as he poured coffee. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," he said. "Must be the company." We'd been living together for 3 months, and I was still getting used to the quiet joy of sharing daily life with someone again. It was different from my marriage to David. Not better, not worse, just different. Less about household logistics, more about companionship and genuine affection. We were both old enough to know ourselves, secure enough not to smother each other, wise enough to understand what a gift it was to find love twice in one lifetime. "Any word from Kayla this week?" Marcus asked, sitting across from me. "She called yesterday to confirm the kids can come for the weekend," I said. "No drama, no last-minute changes. I think she's finally accepting the new normal." The new normal had taken months to establish. After our confrontation, Kayla had tried to dig in harder, threatening to limit my access to the children if I insisted on claiming the insurance payment. But once my lawyer explained that grandparents had rights in Iowa and that her financial behavior wouldn't reflect well in a custody proceeding, she backed down. The $25,000 payout was processed in 2 weeks. I used part of it to create college funds for Tommy and Emma, funds Kayla had no access to. The rest went toward legal fees and the down payment on this new life. More importantly, we now had a formal visitation schedule, every other weekend, alternating holidays, and 2 weeks each summer with us in Galena. It wasn't the seamless involvement I once imagined, but it was consistent, fair, and honest. "She's probably realized," Marcus said, "that fighting you was more exhausting than sharing custody." He was right. Kayla had discovered I was no longer the easily placated widow she could manipulate with guilt and half-truths. When she tried to cancel visits without reason, I called my lawyer. When she misrepresented me to the children, I calmly corrected it. When she hinted that my relationship with Marcus was inappropriate, I simply pointed to the children's smiles as evidence to the contrary. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Marcus and I shared a questioning look. We weren't expecting anyone. I opened the front door. Emma stood on the porch with a small overnight bag, tears streaking down her face. "Grandma Jo, can I stay with you for a while?" Emma stood on my porch with her small overnight bag, tears streaking her cheeks. Behind her, Kayla's SUV sped away from the curb, as if she couldn't get distance fast enough. "Of course, sweetheart." I pulled Emma into a hug. She was still in her pajamas, a coat thrown over them in haste. "What happened?" "Mom and I had a big fight," she sniffed. "She said I could come here if I thought you were so much better at taking care of kids." A familiar spike of anger rose in me at Kayla's manipulation, but I kept my voice soft. "Well, you're always welcome here. Let's get you some breakfast, and you can tell me everything." Over pancakes and hot chocolate, the story slowly came out. Emma had asked to invite a friend to her upcoming birthday party. Kayla refused because the friend's family wasn't our kind of people. The argument escalated until Emma, hurt and furious, shouted that she wanted to live with me because I wouldn't care about stupid things like money. "She told me I was ungrateful and spoiled," Emma whispered. "She said if I liked your house so much I should move in permanently." Fresh tears spilled over. Marcus, who'd been quietly making eggs, sat down beside us. "That must have been very hurtful to hear," he said gently. "She didn't mean it," Emma said quickly, torn between loyalty to her mother and the truth. "She was just mad." "Maybe," I said carefully. "But even when we're mad, we shouldn't say things that hurt the people we love. Like when I told Tommy he was stupid for crying when Dad died. Exactly like that." She sighed. "I felt awful afterwards. I apologized 1,000,000 times. Because you love him," I said. And sometimes adults have to apologize too. Emma chewed her pancake, thinking, "Do you think Mom will apologize?" "I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know this. Nothing that happened changes how much she loves you, or how much I love you." My phone rang, Kayla's name flashing on the screen. Emma tensed immediately. "Should I answer?" I asked. She nodded reluctantly. "Hello, Kayla. Is Emma okay?" Kayla's voice was thick with tears and genuine fear. "I didn't mean for her to run out like that. I was going to bring her over myself after we calmed down, but she was already in the car before I could stop her." "She's fine," I said. "She's eating breakfast. Can I talk to her?" I looked at Emma, who shook her head, eyes wide. "She's not ready to talk yet," I said gently, "but she's safe, and she's welcome to stay here as long as she needs." "Joelle, please," Kayla whispered. "I know I handled it badly. I was stressed and I took it out on her. I said things I didn't mean." It was the most honest admission I'd heard from her in months. "Then maybe think about how to make it right," I said. "You can come over and see her. No pressure for her to come home until she's ready." An hour later, Kayla arrived, looking wrung out and sincerely remorseful. She apologized to Emma, no excuses, no blame, and admitted her comment about our kind of people had been wrong and hurtful. She promised to try to speak with more care. "I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between your mom and me," I told Emma as Kayla prepared to leave. "You love us both. That's okay. Families can be complicated, especially when people are upset." Emma returned home that afternoon, but only after securing Kayla's promise that she could still spend the upcoming weekend with Marcus and me. As their car disappeared down the road, I felt something shift, something profound. For the first time since David's death, I felt like I had agency. I wasn't begging for scraps of relationship with my grandchildren. Emma had come to me for refuge because she knew she could. "You handled that well," Marcus said, wrapping an arm around me. "I'm learning I have more power in these relationships than I thought," I said. "I just had to be willing to use it." "And what have you learned about Kayla?" I thought about it. About 6 months of messy progress, uneasy truces, and slow rebuilding. "She's terrified," I said at last. "Under all the control and manipulation, she's scared, and hurt people, but forgiving her doesn't mean letting her treat me badly." "Very wise," Marcus said, kissing the top of my head. "I had a good teacher," I smiled. "And honestly, it's easier to be generous when you're not afraid of losing everything." That evening, as we sat on our porch watching the river fade into dusk, my phone buzzed. A message from Emma. "Thank you for letting me come over today. I love you, Grandma Jo." I showed it to Marcus. He squeezed my hand. "No regrets?" he asked. I thought carefully. This past year had been brutal at times, full of painful truths, hard conversations, and choices that reshaped everything I thought I knew about my life. But it had also brought me Marcus. It had given me deeper connections with my grandchildren. It had restored something I thought I'd lost forever, myself. "None," I said finally, "not a single one." Just then, another message came in, this time from Tommy. "Mom says we can go fishing with Marcus next weekend. Can he help me catch a really big one?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I think that can be arranged." The future was still uncertain, full of negotiations and growing pains. There would be hard days and difficult choices, but for the first time since losing David, I felt truly ready for them. I had love, I had support, I had the knowledge, hard-won and invaluable, that I was worth fighting for. The woman who once sat alone on Thanksgiving because she wasn't needed, she felt like a stranger now. In her place was someone who knew her worth, someone who refused to accept crumbs anymore, someone who had built a life based not on others' convenience, but on her own value. Marcus pulled me close as the stars began to appear. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Just wondering what David would think." "I think he'd be proud," Marcus said softly. "And I think he'd approve of us." I believed that. David had been good and generous, and he would have wanted me to be happy. "I love you," I said. The words still felt tender and new despite months of saying them. I love you too, he said. Thank you for giving us a second chance. Thank you for being worth the wait. As we sat together in comfortable silence, I realized something beautiful. My story had begun with rejection, exclusion, heartbreak. But it didn't end there. It became a story of reclamation, of choosing myself, of demanding my place at the table. Some gifts, like a silver bracelet bought in a small-town antique shop, are worth waiting 46 years for. And some endings are really just new beginnings in disguise. And now I'm curious about you, the one who stayed with me through this story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your thoughts below. And while you do, I'll leave you with 2 more stories this channel loves, ones that might surprise you just as much. Thank you for watching until the end.